Welcome to this episode of today's talk on reincarnation. And as I stated previously, this is going to involve the man known as Jesus and what the entity Michael has to say. And I want to state right off the bat that much of what will be stated here is aligned with how I have read and interpreted many of the stories in the Bible. This is going to talk a little bit about the crucifixion event. Once again, this aligns with how I have interpreted the story. And I want to reiterate the factor that many people out there that claim to know Jesus, to have a personal relationship with him, don't really even understand that man nor his life, nor the crucifixion event and how it really took place. Understand, please, Jesus did not rise from the dead 3 days after the crucifixion. He died on the cross the first day, which was in the afternoon, evening hours. He was taken down from the cross, prepared on the second day, and then on the third day he arose. It was not 3 days later. Do you understand this? You need to understand this, because the way that I read that story is the same way that this entity Michael explains it. Now let's go on into that explanation from that entity over this man known as Jesus. And once again, I am going to paraphrase. I do not like the word truth. I prefer the word reality. So I will substitute that word truth for the word reality. Reality is the greatest good, and love is the highest reality. Good is of its own reward, as is reality. The love of the Logos, or agape, permeated the being of Jesus, even prior to the manifestation. He lived for the Word. The quest for spiritual liberation took precedence over all things, sometimes to his own despair. Prior to manifestation, this was an emotionally centered fragment who was passionate and sensual. When others rejected his opinions, he was astonished. So the question came up, so why did Christ judge the Pharisees and speak of people being cast out into the darkness? He was describing precisely what they would encounter on the astral interval. He did not judge, he knew. There's a difference. Judgment implies an alternative. There was none. When a master speaks, there is no room for discussion. Now, reading that just, that puts a slap down on me. I don't get many comments anymore. Is it because a master has been speaking? Okay, so is it real that Christ was able to cast out demons? This was yet another question. The demons are produced by the sick mind and do not exist. The exorcist must be able to give the patient a visible substitute. Thus, he must be capable of producing psychic phenomena at will. Jesus was an occult master. He could produce the necessary phenomena to make the patient see his demon leave and occupy some other organism. Then, of course, you must still treat the sickness which caused the soul to produce the demon. Usually this is masochism in its extreme manifestation. So now the question comes up, well, was Jesus really conceived without sex being involved? The answer was merely, of course not. So then the statement comes to Michael's attention, well, Jesus was always against sex, even thinking about sex. Michael replies, Jesus was not against sex. He was for moderation. Prostitution is not moderate, even temple prostitution. So what went wrong? Sex is part of the experience. It may be one of the most highly important parts, and maybe I've neglected it. Maybe in Jesus' time they weren't neglecting it. Maybe if he were here today, he would tell people to have more. Maybe in Jesus' day, people thought about it all the time, and we hardly ever think about it. That was a statement thrown at Michael. This is the reply. Quality is the answer. It is what you think, not how often. In Jesus' time on earth, most of the thoughts were bound up in fertility rites and superstition. They were negative energy vortices. So another participant made this statement. I've read much on the crucifixion and have never been able to figure out why it happened. This is the answer given. He was a threat to Joseph Caiaphas, who was getting rich on the temple funds, and there was a suitable pawn available in the person of the Judean governor, who was a coward and who already was in trouble with Tiberius over other things. The infinite soul cares nothing about the physical body, and when it was realized how the deck was stacked, it was seen as a convenient way to speedily fulfill the prophecy. Okay, so what about the Shroud of Turin? Although it may come as quite a surprise to all those present, this piece of fabric is not a hoax, pious or otherwise, but it is precisely what it is purported to be. The winding sheet of the man you call Jesus. What is not understood here is that the body wrapped in this shroud of linen was not dead when put into the tomb, and therefore sweated and urinated and bled, leaving the imprint that has been so clearly revealed by laser techniques. Body salts are very persistent, as those who have tried to clean blood or urine off the garments show, or know. Excuse me. We have not told you before that the man you call Jesus did not die on the cross, but died later. The body was taken from the cross in a state of deep trance caused by massive physical shock. Remember that there was still a task to perform, and it could not have been completed if the body had been allowed to die on the cross. Of course, the soul had abandoned the body some time before for the manifestation of the infinite soul. The infinite soul is capable of taking any form it wishes, and in this case, this was the body chosen. We must remind you also that catalepsy, though not unknown in those times, was very hard to diagnose. It is also important to remember that those seeking to bury the man Jesus had to do it quickly. The linen itself had survived this long because so many people have taken excellent care of it. Most of the time, it has been kept in sealed containers where dryness helped to preserve it, as well as the impression on the linen. For those who wonder about the height and size, this was a robust and healthy man, not exactly the wispy ascetic type. He enjoyed a rough life for most of his years, and although he did practice some austerities, They were not marked and did not include the ensuing of good food. He was married, and though he did not have any living children at the time of the manifestation of the infinite soul, he did have 6 siblings. We would think that no matter what the examination of the shroud reveals, it will have little effect on the attitudes of most religious groups, though a little controversy might lead to the re-examination and growth for those willing to explore the possibilities. Now then, once again remember, this was back in 1970. That shroud has still been under many examinations, and they're still debating over it. But here we have the reality being explained. So one of the participants said, well, I don't know if I can accept all that. The reply, we have told you many times that we do not require acceptance nor belief. So if evolution occurs through cycle, regardless of what one does, what is the point of the infinite soul manifesting? A lot of people quit their jobs to follow Jesus and then lead useless lives. The implications are not quit these things unless you are on the path instead of quitting them and sitting around waiting for the King and Judgment Day. That was by one of the participants. This is Michael. This was promulgated by a man named John, who had a series of nightmares. It was not pleasant to watch someone you love die in a particularly horrible manner. There was an earthquake and eclipse that day, completely natural phenomena, believe it or not. This gave rise to many bad dreams already susceptible this gave rise to many bad dreams in already susceptible superstitious people. Okay, so can we have a little statement about Matthew? Matthew was relatively a perceptive young soul. Well, what about Paul? Where's Paul now? The fragment that was Saul has not been reborn yet, but will be soon. He will be a 5th level old soul this time, and maybe he will listen. So Paul contradicted himself? His appeal was ludicrous. When he arrived in Rome 2.5 years later, nobody knew what he was talking about. That was by a participant, and this was the reply. He made many errors. This is how you learn. Let's continue on. It's getting interesting, yes? Okay, so the question was brought up, well, so how do I follow the teachings of Christ then? Well, that should be self-evident. Honesty without guile, simplicity without poverty of the soul, love without material expectations, emptying the life of all non-essential consideration, the endless cycles of evolution with the physical plane being the cruelest and roughest. These are the things emphasized in the real teachings of Christ. Well, what about prayer? Prayers, of course, are nothing more than a personality's petition to the essence to come to the rescue. Some do not come from the emotional center, but organized prayer, such as that promulgated by Rome, is purely intellectual and rather boring at that. Yeah. Organized religion is a social structure and has no place in the cosmic scheme. Only the practice of the manifold path brings a soul to the end of the line of the physical plane. Ritual is an enjoyable game which fragments play on the physical plane, and we see no harm in that as such. It is as good a way as any to promote a group high, but it is not good for much else. Please believe us that when we tell you that there is no one out there, when you finally exit, who will ask you if you were... Oh, okay, excuse me. Please believe us when we tell you that there is no one out there when you finally exit who will ask you if you were an Episcopalian. But then, here comes this person in the group again. Well, I don't care what Michael says about religion. I still believe, and I still think it's possible to lead a Christian life. Well, this is the reaction by those blinded by faith. All right? Let's just take a minute here, just so you can reflect a little bit on what I've read thus far. Okay, so let's go ahead and go on into the essential teaching of Christianity. The essential teaching of Christianity had its roots, of course, in a manifestation of the infinite soul. But like most bureaucrats, it was perpetuated by young priests in the passion mode, at their most zealous, who were willing to interject their own biases into the material. Today's Christianity bears little resemblance to the teachings of the man Jesus or to the logos brought to bear by the infinite soul. You must remember that the old king, who was the man Jesus, relinquished his physical body to the infinite soul only during the last 30 days of his life. Prior to that, the teaching was that of a seventh-level old king, transcendent and enlightened being. We would also like to remind you that much of the chronology of the events in this man's life is confused, distorted, and in some instances wholly fictionalized. We would suggest that you bear this in mind when making a study of his teachings. Judaism had its roots in practicality and had, as history teaches, men who were evolutionary leaps ahead of their neighbors in terms of knowledge, particularly of hygiene, nutrition, and mental health. Much akin to when Moses was teaching the Israelites, or the so-called Israelites, the route of sacrificial offerings to God. Once again, re-examine that. It was not about sacrificing. It was, in fact, about how to properly prepare meat. This was originally a cult of physician healers who realized that a superstitious society could be forced to change only by the introduction of the fear of God. This fear was so deeply instilled that the populace was afraid to even mention the name of this angry God associated with cleansing rain and rivers, who raged about their atrocious personal habits. There was a devastating plague just before the enlightened healers appeared, and their very commonsensical advice was accepted as revelation when it became obvious that lives were being saved by the teachings. Now, I could continue on with what Michael has to say about religion and so on and so forth. And I want you to know that it was not just Jesus that they spoke of, because they also spoke of Buddha, Confucius, Muhammad, so on and so forth. But this is the Western society. This is the society that supposedly has a deep belief in Jesus and the Bible. Yet no one will go beyond the words of the Bible. Nobody does their real research. How many historical documents are out there from that day and age? that nobody pays attention to. No. Blinded by faith because of one book, and that one book was created for a narrative. And that narrative was not about the life of Jesus. That was just thrown in to provide that much so-called evidence to make people believe. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and follow up in our next episode with just a few other items of interest and topics of interest when it comes to understanding reincarnation and so on and so forth. By this time, I hope some of your eyes have been opened just a little bit more. So until next time, think about what you've heard, and we'll continue on from there.